All right, how about we get back into a little bit of Code of the Samurai? I'll get that in frame there. Yeah. We got the introduction behind us, so let's dive into the core material, shall we? Part 1 General Discussion. One who is supposed to be a warrior considers it his foremost concern to keep death in mind at all times. Every day and every night, from morning of New Year's Day through the night of New Year's Eve. As long as you keep death in mind at all times, you will always fulfill the ways of loyal and familial duty. You will also avoid myriad evils and calamities. You will be physically sound and healthy. You will live a long life. What is more, your character will improve and your virtue will grow. Here are the reasons for that. All human life is likened to evening dew and morning frost, considered something quite fragile and ephemeral. While this is so of all people's lives, the life of a warrior is particularly precarious. If people comfort their minds with the assumption that they will live a long time, something might happen, because they think they will have forever to do their work and look after their parents. They may fail to perform for their employers and also treat their parents thoughtlessly. But if you realize that the life that is here today is not certain on the morrow, then when you take your orders from your employer and when you look in on your parents, you will have the sense that this may be the last time. So you cannot fail to become truly attentive to your employer, and your parents. This is why I say you will fulfill the path of loyalty and familial duty when you keep death in mind. In any case, when you forget death and become inattentive, you are not conscript about things. You are not circumspect about things, rather. You may say something offensive to someone and get into an argument. You may challenge something you might as well have ignored and get into a quarrel. Or you may stroll about in resorts where you have no business, not avoiding the crowds where you might bump into some oaf and get into an unexpected brawl. You could lose your own life, get your employer bad publicity, and cause your parents and siblings difficulties. All this trouble comes from inattentiveness, when you fail to keep death in mind at all times. When you always keep death in mind, when you speak and when you reply to what others say, you understand the weight and significance of every word as a warrior by profession, so you do not engage in futile arguments. As a matter of course, you do not go to dubious places even if people invite you. So there is no way for you to get into unexpected predicaments. This is why I say you will avoid myriad evil and calamities if you keep death in mind. People of all social classes, high and low, constantly overeat, drink too much, and indulge in their desires to an unhealthy degree, all because of forgetting about death. This puts a strain on their internal organs, so they may die remarkably young, or else become sickly and invalid. When you keep death in mind, even if you are young and healthy, you already know how to take care of yourself. You moderate food and drink, avoid sexual addiction, and behave prudently. As a result, you are physically sound. Because you are healthy, you will live a long time. When you assume that your stay in this world will last, various wishes occur to you, and you become very desirous. You want what others have, and cling to your own possessions, developing a mercantile mentality. When you always keep death in mind, covetousness naturally weakens, and to that degree a grabby, greedy attitude logically does not occur. That is why I say your character improves. Yet there is question of how to keep death in mind. Just keep sitting there all the time waiting for death 24 hours a day, like a monk Shinkai, of whom Yoshiro no Kenko wrote in his Jishuro Zuraguso, might be appropriate for monks' training, but is not in accord with the aim of martial training. If you face death in that way, loyalty and familial duty to your employer and parents will be neglected, and your professional warriorhood will wind up defective. That will never do. The idea is to take care of your public and private duties day and night. And then, whenever you have any free time, when your mind is unoccupied, you think of death, bringing it to mind attentively. It is said that in the great hero Kusunoki Masanaja, I practiced this, Kusunoki Masajinya, still messed up, his instruction to his son Masayuki, he told him to always get used to death. This is for the understanding of neophyte knights. Moving on to education. Well, before we move on, this is a very important lesson for me. I do keep death in mind quite a few times. This is one of the main takeaways I got from the Samurai Code. And it's just things are finite, right? Is that right? Things are finite? Well, in any event, they're temporary, ephemeral. It could be taken away from you at any time. And it's just good to think about that. That was my main takeaway from this, by and large. But let's move on to education. Warriors stand in a position above the other three castes and are supposed to be professional administrators, so they need to study and gain an extensive understanding of the principle of things. Even so, warriors in time of warfare invariably participate in their first combat by the age of 15 or 16, doing their work as knights, so they practice martial arts from the age of 12 or 13. For that reason, they have no time for study and are naturally illiterate. During the era of the Civil Wars, there were any number of warriors who couldn't even look up a word in the dictionary. That was not necessarily because of their own negligence or because their parents raised them badly, but because their immediate need was to concentrate on military arts. As for warriors born in present era, when the land is at peace, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter if they care little for military arts, but since this is not a world in which they absolutely must go into combat from the age of 15 or 16, they should be taught classical literature, reading, and writing from the age of 7 or 8. Then, when they are 15 or 16, they ought to be taught to practice archery, horsemanship, and all the other martial arts. This should be the basic aim of educating the children of warriors in peaceful times. Illiteracy among warriors in times of chaotic warfare has a reason. There is no legitimate reason for illiteracy among warriors in an era of peace. Children are not to blame for this. It is only due their negligence and irresponsibility of the parents. Ultimately, it is because they do not know the way to love their children. Yeah, you got to teach your children, right? That's the takeaway. Responsibility. I don't know. Prepare for war in times of peace. That's the takeaway, too. I still practice that in the military, from what I recall, unless they've changed things, which I don't think they have. All right, on to familial duty. For warriors, taking good care of parents is fundamental. If people do not care for their parents, they are not good, even if they are exceptionally smart, well-spoken, and handsome. Let me explain. In the way of the warrior, it is essential to do it right from the root to branch. If you do not understand the root and the branch, there is no way for you to know your duty. One who does not know his duty can hardly be called a warrior. Knowing the root and the branch means understanding that our parents are the root of our bodies, and our bodies are branches of the flesh and bone of our parents. It is because of the desire to establish ourselves, who are the branches, that circumstances arise whereby we neglect our parents, who are the roots. This is because of failure to understand root and branch. Now then, there are two ways of taking care of your parents. Suppose there are parents of mild temperament, who educate their children with true kindness and affection, provide for them, marry them well, and then retire, leaving them well situated with an adequate estate. For children of such parents, to take ordinary care of them is nothing particularly praiseworthy or impressive. Even with strangers, when they have treated us kindly and helped us out personally or financially, we do not overlook it. If they are in need, we are even willing to set aside our own affairs. How much less could we ever expect to think that what we've done enough to care for our parents? considering the depth of love that they have shown us in every way. For this reason, I say that ordinary familial duty is nothing remarkable. Now, suppose there are parents who are obstreperous. Oh, man. Don't know that word. Cranky and argumentative, who resist on running the household and refuse to hand over anything, who are importunate, inconsiderate, and demanding, and on top of that complain to others how vexed and troubled they are by the poor treatment they get from their sons, thus damaging their children's reputations. To honor even such unreasonable parents as parents, to take the trouble to humor them, to lament their aging and decline, and to take care of them sincerely without a bit of negligence. This is the aim of dutiful children. When a warrior with this spirit takes an overlord as an employer and becomes an official, he understands the requirements of loyalty and duty. When his employer is flourishing, this is a matter of course. But even when something unexpected happens to his employer, and he has all sorts of troubles, a warrior is still fiercely loyal and does not leave his employer's side, even when 100 allies are reduced to 10. Even when 10 are reduced to 1. So steadfastly loyal in battle as to disregard his own life. Parents and employers, familial duty and loyalty, these differ only in name. For there is no difference in the sincerity of the heart. So it is that an ancient is reported to have said, "Look for loyal ministers in homes with filial sons. There is no such thing as someone who is disrespectful to his parents, yet faithful to his employer. If someone is so immature as to be remiss in familial care for his parents, who are the origin of his own body, there is no way he can be moved by the kindness of an employer who is not his flesh and blood, to be completely loyal. If a man who is not caring toward his parents at home does not go into service of a lord, who keeps his eyes on his employer's balance sheet, and as soon as he sees any little slip, his attitude changes, in an emergency he will flee or turn traitor. There are cases like this, past and present. This is something to be ashamed of, something to be weary of." Well, a lot of mixed messages in there. Maybe not. Just a little hard for me to track. I don't know. You gotta be a decent individual, right? If you can't be decent to one set of people, who's to say you're going to be decent to another? Loyalty, integrity. True hallmarks of a warrior. Yeah. Seriously. All right, moving on. Principles of warriors. In the Code of Warriors, there are 2 kinds of principles, with 4 levels. The 2 kinds of principles are ordinary principles and emergency principles. The ordinary principles include principles of knighthood and principles of weaponry. The emergency principles include army principles and combat principles. The principles of knighthood include washing your hands and feet and bathing morning and night, keeping your body clean, shaving and dressing your hair every morning, dressing formally according to the season and circumstances, and always keeping your fan in your belt, not to mention your long and short swords. When dealing with guests, you treat them courteously according to their status and avoid useless talk. Even when you partake of a bowl of rice or a cup of tea, you are always careful not to be slovenly. If you are in public service when off duty, you do not simply lounge around. You read, practice calligraphy, contemplate ancient stories or ancient warrior codes. Whether you're walking, standing still, sitting down, or reclining, in your conduct and manner you carry yourself in a way that exemplifies a genuine warrior. As for principles of weaponry, the first thing to learn is swordsmanship, then lancing, riding, archery, shooting, and any other martial arts. Your duty is to study, practice, and master them, so that you can be ever ready with them. Once you have cultivated these 2 levels, the principles of knighthood and principles of weaponry, you lack nothing in the way of ordinary principles. In the eyes of ordinary people, you will seem like a good warrior, worthy of employ. However, warriors are fundamentally emergency men. When there is civil disobedience, They set aside their usual knightly ways for the moment, adopt military terminology for their superiors, comrades, and subordinates, doff their formal suits, and put on armor, take up weapons, and head for the enemy's ground. There are all sorts of manners of forms of doing this, collectively referred to as an army's principles. It is imperative to know these. Next are combat principles. When your enemies and allies clash in battle, if your dispositions and maneuvers work as planned, you gain victory. Otherwise, you lose the advantage and suffer defeat. There are traditional secrets to these various maneuvers and dispositions. These are called combat principles. It is imperative to know them. Army principles and combat principles are the two levels of emergency principles. A warrior who has cultivated these 4 levels of ordinary and emergency principles to perfection is considered a top-class knight. If you have accomplished the 2 levels of ordinary principles, you are competent for service as a knight. But if you have not mastered the 2 levels of emergency principles, you cannot be a samurai commander, a group leader, a magistrate, or anything like that. Accordingly, make this distinction. To become an all-around warrior, it is essential to practice the principles of knighthood and weaponry, as well as the inner secrets of army and combat principles, determining never to give up without having become a top-class knight. What I took from this, idle time, you got to do something with it. Whether it's reading, practicing something, the war state, it's not necessarily the battle, right? It's just out there being productive individual or someone with some depth, some character, whether that means practicing a musical instrument, calligraphy. What is that to us these days? It's just artwork or mastering some form of, trade, I suppose. It's important. Got to do something with your time, right? We've only got so much of it because we will die, right? Keep your eye on death. And in the meantime, do something productive, right? Or don't. Hey, be a hedonist. Why not? But do it well. Be a master of it, right? Okay, moving on. Not forgetting combat. For warriors, it is essential to keep the spirit of combat in mind 24 hours a day, whether walking, standing still, sitting down, or reclining, never forgetting it. Japanese custom is different from that of other countries, in that even lower-class people such as farmers, merchants, and artisans all treasure a rusty short sword. This is a Japanese custom, but even so, these 3 lower castes do not make soldierly a profession. In warrior houses, even the underlings and squires always wear a short sword, as a rule. How much more so is it imperative for full-fledged knights to see to it that they are never without swords at their side, even for a moment. For this reason, really serious warriors even wear an edgeless sword or a wooden sword to the bath. If you are this attentive even at home, how much the more so when you go out. It is not impossible that on the road or at your destination you may run into someone with a drunken rage, or some kind of fool, and get into an unexpected duel. There is an old saying, when you go out your door, it is like seeing an enemy. Since you are a professional warrior and wear swords at your side, you should never forget the spirit of combat at any time. When you do not forget the spirit of combat, you also spontaneously act in accordance with the reality of keeping death in mind. A warrior who wears 2 swords at his side but does not put the spirit of combat into his heart is nothing but a peasant or a merchant wearing the skin of a warrior. And with that, we'll close up. Part 1A, I guess we'll call it. That's right. What I take from that? Well, it is a different culture these days, but there is an open carry law in a lot of states, right? You take your weapon with you. I don't know if you want to take a pistol to the bath, but they said they do treasure a rusty sword. And if you take a pistol to the bath, you will be scraping some rust off that bluing, let me tell you. Hell, I remember standing in formation back in boot camp. We were the last platoon to be inspected on a somewhat foggy San Diego day, morning rather. We were the last platoon to be inspected. I see we stood there for about 3 hours in formation. And in that small time alone, we had cleaned and oiled our rifles the night before that inspection. And there had already been spot rust accumulating on all the weapons. I was the first in line after my platoon leader, or my squad leader rather, and all the weapons had spot rust. All of them had started failing down the line. But anyway, they started not counting that because all the weapons had spot rust. So there's a little story for you, rusty sword action. And next time we touch back, we'll move on to part 1B, I guess we'll call it. The Code of the Samurai. That's right. Okay. Moving on.